Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we start to take a look ahead to the season, which is already here. We get some thoughts on this upcoming season from Kris Johnson that comes your way after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen each and every day. And now your favorite podcast is also a newsletter, the Locked On Bucks daily newsletter, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right into your inbox. Sign up now for free at lockedondaily.com. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, as you can see, we mentioned at the top, we are joined by Kris Johnson on today's show to start to take a look at the Bucks this upcoming season. Of course, you can hear Kris on the Here District podcast with Marcus Johnson as a part of Bucks Plus feed. And Kris, I guess as we start to get into this and thoughts on this team this upcoming season, let's go back to the end of last season and just where this team was kind of headed going into the playoffs. It was a very weird feeling. I remember talking with people from Indiana who were very confident that their Pacers were going to beat the Bucks and asking, well, what's the feeling in Milwaukee? And said, I don't really know how to describe it. It's a weird feeling that for the last, 5 years, there was a lot of confidence in this group. And I think really the floor that was set under Coach Budenholzer, but they watched a lot of change with a coaching change, with an assistant coach leaving before the season started, countless injuries. You knew something was off with Damian Lillard. That last year was strange in that all of that confidence just wasn't really there. And I think a lot of Bucks fans didn't know what to expect. You knew changes needed to be made, and we started to see that in the offseason. So I guess to start it with $1 million question, were the right changes made?
Yeah. I think given the wiggle room that General Manager John Horst had to play with, you couldn't have asked for a better offseason, in my opinion. 3 big-time pickups, and they got them at the minimum, right?
Yeah.
So they got them at the minimum. High-value guys at different positions. Gary Trent Jr. at the 2, Delon Wright at the 1, and then Torrey Prince comes in at the 3/4. Man, you just couldn't ask for a better. These guys bring. Well, let's put it like this: when you replace Jay Crowder, Pat Bev, and who else was it?
Malik Beasley.
Malik Beasley. With these 3 guys, it's a total upgrade, in my opinion. I feel like the Bucks have upgraded their backbench guys, and now you have guys that can execute a defensive philosophy, a physical defensive philosophy that's going to bode well for Milwaukee. It's going to help Dame, help Giannis, help Khris, having these guys, and who can also knock down shots and who are capable scorers. I think of the 3, Gary Trent Jr. has been super impressive, but I really think down the line, Torrey Prince's value as a small ball 4 is really going to help this team. And that's looking way out, but I'm very happy with what Doc did, what the front office did as far as upgrading the players, and then what the front office and Doc Rivers did as far as bringing in his staff. I think that was really important for him. Last year, he came in mid of the season, had to finish the season with guys that weren't his guys, clean house. Now he has a group of guys that he's comfortable with, brought in Greg Buckner as defensive coordinator, who did a heck of a job in Cleveland in the last several years. 3 years, they've been top 7 defensively. So I think the new players plus the new blood on the staff is going to reinvigorate this Bucks team and this for this upcoming season.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I've been saying the same thing throughout the offseason, especially given the fact that the Bucks were only loaded with minimum contracts to hand out. So being able to upgrade while only having that at your disposal was a big boom for this particular Bucks team. But when looking at this upcoming season, after kind of seeing how last one ended, one thing you heard consistently was just like, we're looking forward to continuity. We're looking forward to stability,
Yeah.
knowing who our coach is, having a better understanding of what our roster is, so on and so forth. And going into training camp, you hear Doc Rivers mentioning like he's implementing his offense and his defense and what he's looking to do. So while we have a lot of the same pieces from last year outside of the three guys who we've just mentioned, Doc is looking to kind of put his little twist on it. So just in your opinion, Kris, when you're looking at this team having a level of continuity, knowing who their coach is, more stability, how important do you think that plays into a training camp in a season where you are implementing some new things as well, although you have a lot of the same faces in the building?
Yeah, I think it's paramount. I mean, imagine going into a situation that you inherit that isn't yours, that you haven't really put your stamp on, and you have to try to figure out how to win games through like the toughest part of your schedule. I mean, that's a difficult position to be in when you're Doc Rivers. There was a lot of slippage that took place from an accountability standpoint under Griff. Unfortunately, the Bucks, started off 30-13 against one of the weakest schedules in the league, but when Doc comes into town, and then doing the 30-13, the defensive ranking wasn't too great. Doc comes in and you started to see just how the tide started to turn. But again, having an entire half a season and now an off season to kind of get to know guys, understand people, get on the same page. I thought Camp Connect at UC Irvine this last several during training camp was one of the best things Doc Rivers could have ever done. I mean, you get these guys, take them away, sequester them off in Irvine, California, which is much different than UCLA, where they had training camp last year. It's a much different environment. It's a much different situation. At UCLA, you got people, stragglers trying to check it out, coming in. There's a lack of privacy, whereas Irvine, they're really able to lock in and do what they wanted to do. All the team bonding events. Kris took guys to SpaceX. Giannis had an event. Dame had an event. I mean, that stuff really matters in today's day and age in the NBA, I think, because I think that team chemistry and guys actually liking each other is a big part of what goes into successful teams. It used to be you didn't have to like anybody. You could just do your job and everything was all good. But nowadays, I feel like, the closer you can get from a bond. Doc brought in a mentalist to come in and had everybody just rolling. I mean, I want to see this mentalist situation that Doc, this is what I believe Eric Name of The Athletic, I read one of his articles, said Doc brought in a mentalist. But it just gives you an idea of the lengths that Doc was going through to indeed put his stamp on this team. I mean, they were having film sessions after practice, and not to mention the coaching style of defensive coordinator Greg Buckner. I think the guys really adapted to him very well. It's a big deal when, as an NBA player, you're looking to one of your assistant coaches for answers and they don't have it. I mean, this is not that guy in Greg Buckner. He's going to have answers. He's going to answer. He's going to know what he's talking about. He's going to put you in the right positions, in my opinion, to succeed. He's already had 2 long arm rim protecting bigs that he worked wonders with in Cleveland. And I have no doubt that they're going to do something similar here with the Bucks this season.
This next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by BetterHelp. Halloween lets us have fun with what scares us. But what about those fears that don't involve zombies and ghosts? Well, therapy is a great tool for facing your fears and finding ways to overcome them. Because sometimes the scariest thing is not facing our fears in the first place and holding ourselves back. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. To get started, all you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, and from there you get matched with a licensed therapist. You can even switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. I think that bringing up the training camp part and how this team came together as a team, it kind of prompts us to one of the bigger talking points that seemed to spread like wildfire coming out of media day. And that was the confirmation. Well, Giannis and Dame didn't work out together in the offseason. Camille and I have talked about it, and that I think it's much ado over nothing. I mean, Giannis and Kris don't work out together in the offseason. They have the best chemistry on the team. But when you saw that, did you make anything of that?
Not really. Maybe, when in my younger days, I would have thought that had something to do with it, or that was a big deal. But as I've gotten older, I'm not trying to age myself, but I understand the game and I understand what time stuff is. And so those guys don't have to work out together to make things work. You bring up a great example with Khris Middleton. All that Dame and Giannis have to do is figure this thing out in the context of 5-on-5, figure this thing out in the context of small doses, pick and rolls, little actions here and there. They aren't that far off, in my opinion. I feel like, if last year the injury things, don't happen, we have a completely different outcome. But I'm not too concerned about Giannis and Dame, their situation. I feel like those two have a really good rapport. There's a lot of mutual respect between those two athletes. And I think that Giannis especially and Dame, they came into this season with a sense of urgency. Yeah. Dame, well documented last year, going through the personal issues, the transition from his personal life into a new city and everything that came along with that's been well documented. I don't want to go over it, but you guys know what I'm talking about. That's tough. That wears on you as a player. They're human beings as well. And so that's the thing we also got to understand. I know they're paid a lot of money to do a job, but when you go through a situation like Dame went through last year, you don't expect him necessarily to be himself. Now, he took the onus to work out hard. He was with, I believe, David Goggins, the Navy SEAL guy, and he spent a lot of time in the gym with his brother, but just constantly working. And working with a purpose, understanding that there's something to prove, that there's a lot of responsibility on his shoulders this season to that Bucks organization after having the type of season that he had last year. And then Giannis is coming in as well, reinvigorated, had a great summer with the Greek national team, spoke about it at length, how his coach on that team really pushed him, really got in him, really kept him focused. And, he's kind of carrying over that high intensity approach to basketball into this season, coming off arguably one of the greatest seasons we've ever seen in the history of basketball, whatever it was, 60% shooting, 30 and all that. I mean, dude, it's like, how can you not be motivated if you're Giannis? You know what I'm saying? To come in this season, having been a champion, understanding what it feels like to reach the mountaintop and then placing the pressure on himself and on his shoulders to go ahead and turn this thing around. So I think, and also Khris Middleton. Kris is coming in with a renewed sense of, responsibility, accountability. Look, he mentioned it in an article he was talking to in a feature with Eric Name. He mentioned it. He's like, he wants to earn the trust of the other teammates to know that they can count on him night in, night out. Not Kris is here one day, Kris isn't here, for another couple of weeks. And he even said it, that he feels like that disrupts team chemistry. And so that just gives you an idea of the mindset that these dudes are in for this particular season. It's amazing that they are so criminally underrated nationally. I mean, you got guys like Bill Simmons and everybody else talking all this stuff and just throwing shots at the Bucks every chance they get. And it's kind of alarming. I get it. But then there's another side of me that understands what time it is with this team. I've seen these guys in practice. I've seen what's up. It's this team is a serious ball club. They got the pieces, they got the personnel, and they got the coaching staff and the right defensive type of mindset to really maximize everything this season.
Real quick, Justin, because I know we got to get to you, but KJ, to your point about just the personal lives and everything that the guys had going on, one thing that stood out to me from the Netflix show Starting Five, that just aired on Netflix, Jimmy Butler was talking about losing his dad during the season. And he was very candid about it. And it's a part in the documentary where he's just like, I love basketball. I'm never going to cheat the game, but like, I really don't care about any of this right now. Like, I am hurting and I really don't care about all of this that's in front of me. And your point about how all of these players are human beings, I think so many people lose sight of that, especially given like the prominence of sports betting and people just kind of quantifying these guys as just athletes or just players. But that personal piece of it is so important. And I think for Dame coming into this season where he's more settled with everything going on in his personal life, even with Giannis getting married this summer, you're getting these life events done. And then it's like, okay, now I'm in a place where I can kind of continue to go forward. So I definitely wanted to just call that piece out before we continue on, especially talking more about Khris Middleton and what he brings to this Milwaukee Bucks team.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Did you have any thoughts on that, Chris?
Oh, Khris?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Well, just on the whole aspect.
Well, the aspect. I think it's more important now. I think we have a greater awareness of guys as humans now because of all the mental health stuff that has, we've kind of been focused on a little bit more. We care about it more, and so we're going to care about players more than athletes. I think just a lot more than we have in the past, and I like and I do agree with you, Camille, that is essential. It is important that those guys get their personal stuff in order. Giannis being married, I mean, that's like such a huge deal, but it's also going to ground him, and it's also going to give him a renewed sense of purpose. And you see that with Dame, you see that with all these guys, even something going through personal stuff like with Khris and these injuries and these freak accidents. I mean, imagine how much that must do to him mentally on a day-to-day basis. And now he's like, he's guilty. He's not a guy that's trying to get the check and just, hey, I'm collecting my check, I'm not really tripping. He really feels a responsibility to play, to perform. He's putting pressure on himself to play 70, 75 games this season. I mean, that's what he told Eric Name. So it's like, this dude is locked in. And to me, that's where it starts. And that's going to be important in pushing everything forward as we go through the season.
Mm-hmm. And, when we talk about what Camille just mentioned too, I think everybody understood it was a whirlwind for Damian Lillard, but when he really put it into context even more, and then like, look, here's the timeline. I obviously knew I was going to be traded, but I didn't know until the very last moment that Milwaukee was even a possibility. I was already kind of gearing up for I'm going somewhere else. And then you have to shift to that. And then I'm traded that Thursday. I fly into Milwaukee. That's Saturday. We have training camp starting a day later. I still don't have a place to live. I'm in a hotel. My family's in Portland. And just adding more of that context where I think you can take it for granted of, oh, so what? He got traded. Players get traded and you have to deal with this. But, as we mentioned throughout the season, it was different for Damian Lillard and just how grounded he is and the importance of his family. And I think you even noticed it in those games where Damian Lillard would miss time and come back, and it seemed like he was rejuvenated and re-energized when he had time to be in Portland and have that support of his family.
Absolutely. That stuff is paramount, man. That stuff is paramount. I mean, you see, look at Dante DiVincenzo and just how much emotion and intensity was involved with him being traded. Like, there's beef there. Yeah. Like, you get traded from somewhere, man, it's a salty taste in your mouth. And it takes some guys a little bit longer to get over that stuff. And we can't sit there and say, hey, man, tough it up, suck it up and this and that. We got to let dudes move how they move. Well, like, we understand, like, you still got to do your job. And Dame still had a pretty decent year last year. Even though it was a down year, he's still one of only, I believe, we talk about it on our pod, but like 12 or 14 guys to put up the stat line that he did at his age last year. Yeah. I think there hasn't been too many in the history of the game to do it. And that's on a year where he's distracted and a down year. So I'm looking forward to Dame doing big things this year.
Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, and do it all on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. To get started, just head over to FanDuel.com.
Yeah, as I am too. I kept saying, like, going into the season, I think it's going to be a really good Dame year. And I mean, Dame's been talking about how he's planning to show everybody the true him this year as well. And you don't hear guys talking and setting the bar to a certain level unless they're confident they're going to be able to clear it. So I love it.
And we heard it immediately, like after game 6, when he was on the podium in that loss to the Pacers, it was, you're going to be surprised next year.
Right away. And he's come out of the preseason looking pretty good so far. So I'm really excited to see what he looks like this season.
Putting in the work.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the other name of Khris Middleton, who it feels like Camille and I have taken quite a few bullets in defending Khris through the years, but he's obviously very polarizing. And the latest update or news is it doesn't seem as though he's going to play in that season opener against the 76ers. You referenced what he had to say in that sit down he had with Eric Name, where he said, look, my expectations of a good year are not just statistical, but the games played as well. And I get it that there's already the sense from that portion of Bucks fans that are going to die on the hill that Khris Middleton is overrated or however else they want to term it. But, you know, as we've maintained, it's not important to have Khris Middleton healthy in October. It's important to have Khris Middleton healthy at the second half of the season. It doesn't even mean that Khris Middleton is hurt right now. It just may be this is how we feel we can ramp him up and preserve him for the playoffs, because I can't for the life of me figure out why so many people are so up in arms and opposed to, well, he's not playing, you can't rely on him, yada, 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 when you saw what a healthy Khris Middleton, who was basically the only option, was still able to do in the playoffs.
But I think it goes to what Khris also talked about with this tag of being injury prone, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that he's injury prone, that he suffered some really unfortunate accidents. He takes care of his body. He's a dedicated professional. So this is like when you say someone's injury prone, it kind of gives the sense that that person lazy, isn't working, isn't doing the lifting, isn't doing his rehab. But that's not Khris Middleton. He takes himself as a professional athlete very seriously, puts in the time, puts in the work. So I get where people are coming from, but I think it's a lack of understanding what time it really is with Middleton, how much he's dedicated himself to come back from every time he's been hurt. Like Khris goes hard. He does like the TO when Terrell Owens got hurt back in the day, made it back in 6 weeks. Like Super he works, he made it play in the Super Bowl. He works like that every time he gets hurt. And so you can't help but respect a guy like that. And let's talk about Khris as a ball player. Okay. Absolutely. Are you kidding me? He is well worth any weight, any holding him out to the second half of the season. In my opinion, I'd rather have if you have a healthy Khris Middleton, a healthy Giannis, Dame, and Brook. I mean, that's a 4-man lineup that was amongst the best in the NBA. Well, the number one net rating in the NBA last year, I believe. Like, we got to wait for that. We got to do whatever we can to preserve his health, be cautious. Don't try to rush this guy. I love what Doc's doing. Hey, he's not playing the season opener. That's not the end of the world, in my opinion. And I just think that the Bucks fans should just exhibit a little bit of patience with Middleton and during this comeback, because he's going to pay dividends at some point during the season.
Well, and Camille, before you jump in here, I mean, she and I have talked about this too. I mean, the Bucks have the benefit too of Khris Middleton as your third option. I think this is a much different conversation, and there's a lot more urgency surrounding him if you didn't make that trade. And it's not to take away from Drew, the player overall, but what you're asking for offensively from Khris, I think this gives you more time to say, look, we've seen what you're capable of doing. And the thing that nobody mentions, especially if you're on that side of, oh, he's injury prone, is he was on pace to play in almost 70 games last year before he came down on Kevin Durant's foot.
Oh, yeah, Durant with the reckless closeout. But yeah, I mean, that was an interesting play. But no, he was on pace to play 70. He was locked in. And again, there's a difference between injury prone and unfortunate accidents that cause injuries. I think Khris is a victim of the latter.
I think so too. And to your point about just how bad that ankle sprain was from him stepping on KD's foot, it bothered him for the rest of the season. Like, he was able to come back and play on it. And we get to the playoffs where there's no Giannis. It's just him and Dame. And then at some points, Dame's out or he's hurt. And Khris is out there on another bad ankle because he's his other ankle during that playoff series. And he's still hooping. Like, that was the part to me where I'm like, I don't understand after that Pacers series how there can be anyone looking at Khris Middleton's game and just being like, nah, the Bucks don't need that. And you see the numbers behind it. Like, he's one of the most efficient mid-range shooters in the entire league. And he shoots a very decent volume of them at that. So it's not one of those things where it's like, well, the efficiency's up because he doesn't shoot that many of them. It's like, no, he shoots a lot of them and he's really good at those. So Khris Middleton, to Justin's point, which I bring up a lot as well, like, my concern levels for Khris are so much lower, knowing that he's not the second option on this team. Like, that changes the equation for the Bucks and what you can expect from them in the regular season. But if he does miss games, going back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show, having a Torrey Prince on your bench who you can insert into the starting lineup as your starting three, or a small ball four with various lineups, like, that helps the Bucks, I think, a lot during the regular season, especially when you're just trying to make sure you're able to get to the playoffs healthy with a full squad. So, like, that Prince pickup, I think, is really big for the Bucks. Not even just as Khris Middleton insurance, but what he can do to stretch the lineups. Because when you look around the East as well, like the Knicks, for example, a team that's smaller, I just keep thinking of the different small ball lineups the Bucks might be able to utilize against a team like that. So love Khris, and love that Prince pickup as like some added insurance in addition to somebody who can unlock some lineups for this Bucks team.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting to go into this season knowing that the Bucks can match some of these smaller lineups. Last year, it seemed to be a struggle. And this year, I'm excited to see, like, how Doc's going to mix and match, how they're going to tinker. But the thing about Torrey, I mean, his value, I mean, he's been playing a lot of the four, but he is well versed, and he's a professional small forward, so he understands the game. He understands the spacing. I mean, there's just like he's a plug and play guy, and he makes winning plays on both ends. And those are the type of dudes that you need to have when you got a guy like Middleton that's going to be out. You got a guy that's able to make winning plays, score, and defend. I mean, there's nothing better.
I wonder if we've already revealed the answer here, but who do you think the most important role player is on the team this year?
Prince is pretty important, I think, on a certain level.
And I guess to clarify, by role player, I mean basically not Giannis, Dame, Khris, and Brook Lopez.
Yeah, I think when I'm looking at Gary Trent Jr. and the type of defensive matchups he's going to have, I can't understate his value as a defender. I mean, as a guy that's physical at the point of attack, but can also understands how to play the lanes. Did a really great job in Toronto, almost 2 steals a game, but just can do both. Physical dude, nails, major guts as far as clutch, being able to knock down shots, killed the Bucks last year. And then Delon Wright. Delon Wright is a low-key serious upgrade over Pat Bev, in my opinion. Delon's an LA kid, so I'm very familiar with his game. Grew up, with his brother, but I'm very familiar with Delon's game, and he's somebody who I like from a skill perspective, but I love his demeanor. I love his leadership qualities. I love the way he approaches the game as a professional too. And I think he's going to help, along with Dame, bring along some AJ Johnson and help their development as well. So I think the line is his importance can't be understated as well.
Well, and you guys on your show had David Aldridge on, who was raving about that pickup. And the Bucks, they're not going to be a high pressure defense, but with those two guys, and Gary Trent Jr. and Delon Wright, they're going to get to a lot of loose balls, and it's a big upgrade over reading the passing lanes.
Absolutely. And the securing possessions is everything in the NBA, and those dudes are going to get to it. And then they also have an ability on pick and rolls to stay attached to their guys. The Bucks at times last year struggled with staying attached to guys. So now Brooks got to help, which triggered a lot of like weak side rotations and things like that, backside lob action. So now less switching will take place because guys are able to stick. And that's something that they were really stressing in training camp. Less switching, not being fans of switching all the time on every single action or possession. I think we're going to see a lot of guys staying with guys, less of Brook having to show. Doc even said it, man. He said it Doc told Eric Name something to the effect of he's tired of seeing Brook, close out to the corners. Like, one of these dudes, Brook or Giannis, is going to have to stay in and rim protect. That's been an emphasis for the Bucks this entire preseason. And I think that's going to bode well for them defensively. I mean, although we saw Giannis make some crazy closeouts, I think it was that Chicago game where he's closing out to dudes, but that's like, a freak of nature doing 2 steps from the middle of the key. Like I can live with that, but the more you minimize being stretched out defensively, having to make up for plays, and that starts at the point of attack, because now if that's bottled up at the point of attack, all this stuff on the back end, we can just stand pat, stick to our guys, stay close to shooters and play one-on-one defense. I think that's going to be the most important change for the Bucks defensively this season.
All right, so much more to get to with KJ. So Camille and I are going to carry that over into a part 2 tomorrow. The rest of our conversation with Kris Johnson will touch on some more individual players, things that Kris has observed of this team, and take a look at 2 of the players that have turned the most heads so far this preseason, the 2 rookies. So we'll continue our conversation with Kris Johnson on tomorrow's show. That will do it for today, though. For Camille and Kris Johnson, I'm Justin Garcia. We will talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.